Hello, everyone. Thanks for being here. Thank you, Senator Kaine, for
Absolutely.
taking some time out of a busy day. We've got a lot to cover, not a lot of time, and I want to jump into it. Maybe let's start with some maybe breaking news. You're sprinted up here from a Help Committee hearing just today on the state of K-12. So is there any, what did you hear from that out of your questioning? Anything jump out?
My committee yesterday had a hearing with Dr. Menares, and there was news out of that one. The one today was a tremendous amount of agreement. So we had 5 panelists from former school superintendents, heads of state boards of education, 3 Republican chosen witnesses, 2 Democrats. Big topic, state of K-12 education. So you might imagine we covered a whole lot of ground. The setup was a little bit, NAEP scores are not going up. They're either stable or in most places going the wrong direction. What do we attribute it to? And we got into a very significantly broad discussion, everything from the impact of cell phones and social media, teacher shortages, states not doing enough, and maybe the federal government not doing enough around funding equalization so that districts within states have somewhat even levels of funding. But some areas of very strong agreement were career and technical education. 20 years ago when I was in school, if you were in the kind of Vogue Tech program, your shoulders would slump as you'd say it. Now, career and tech educators are sort of really the hot, popular kids, and jurisdictions all over the country, red and blue, are doing major things with career and tech, because not only prepping people for careers, but it turns out solid career and tech education also kind of ignites your passion for academic subjects. You take an EMT course and suddenly your biology grade goes up because it's not just rote memorization of facts. Oh, I see why this matters. So there was a lot of agreement around career and tech education.
I want to come back to the broad agreement, but I love that you mentioned tech education. What's interesting for you, I think you're focused on education, is your own personal journey on that, which touched a lot on vocational and tech education. Tell a little bit about that story and how it informs the way you think about it.
So I graduated from high school in 1976. I'm 67. My dad ran an ironworking and welding shop in the stockyards of Kansas City. Classic small business, 5 employees in a tough year, 7 in a good year, plus mom and the 3 boys. It was ironworker organized. It was a union shop. And I grew up working nights, weekends, and summers for my dad and going to a Jesuit high school where there were no CTE offerings. I was seeing the tremendous artistry of these welders and ironworkers, and I was going to a school where are you going to go to college was the only question you would be asked about your future. So I kind of had a cognitive dissonance thing going on in my early life. When I was in Harvard Law School, I left school for a year to work with Jesuit missionaries in Honduras. And I said I'd volunteer. And they said, what do you want to do? Well, I'm in Harvard Law School. They said, that's worthless. I said, well, my dad runs a welding and ironworking shop. I know how to do that. Great. We just started a career and technical school. You can be the principal. So I started with 30 kids in a brand new career and tech school. By the end of the year, I had 75. I had an adult program. The school's still going with 500 students 40 years later. But that combination of working for my dad in the family business, but then running this CTE program really taught me that, we need training and skills, but also it is something that so many of our students are disengaged. A witness today said many students are passengers rather than explorers. And CTE has a way of igniting passion and then making you more connected, not just to whatever the technical discipline is, but even more broadly to academic subjects.
And then the folks who got that training in that program, that was probably life-changing.
It was. It was low. I mean, it was low skill. I'd stand outside on the porch of the school and just hear the incredible noise that 60 teenage boys can make with hammers and saws and think, I was at Harvard Law School last year. This is about as different an educational institution as there is. But they were being trained not only to probably start their own taller, which is a Spanish word for workshop, but also they could build furniture for their families. And so it was a skill that even if they didn't pursue it, they could still use it for their families, but many would start their own small businesses.
But then at your high school, in the greatest country on earth, not even an option.
Yeah, it wasn't. We didn't. We had arts classes, but other than that, there was no technical education of any kind.
What's your view then of how the United States has learned that lesson from your time in Honduras?
We're much better at it, but we have education to do. We have to educate parents. We have to educate guidance counselors. The hangover effect of you got to go to college is still pretty strong. In the reconciliation bill, which I voted against because of Medicaid and SNAP, I was able, because I've been around for a while, it's going to pass. Can I get some stuff in? I was able to get in a bipartisan bill I've had for 10 years that Pell Grants can be used for career and technical education, not just college. That is now policy. If you look at federal policy, what you would realize is, man, you guys really like college, but you don't like career and technical education. Pell Grants, use it for college, not for career and technical education. My oldest boy is a Marine. Military tuition assistance program. This is not GI Bill for veterans. This is active duty. He could approve anybody in his platoon, or he had a battalion level position, for $4,500 a year in tuition assistance, had to be college. Somebody said, hey, I'm an ordnance specialist. If you give me $300, I can pass the American Welding Society certification exam. Sorry, not college. I can give you $4,500, but I can't give you $300. And there's a whole lot of policies like this that reflect a kind of an unconscious elevation
like
of college at the
mindset
expense.
that we have to change.
Yeah.
It's fascinating the way you frame that. Well, like, give me $40 to learn how to weld. No, we'll give you $5,000 to study ancient history or English. Like, I'm an English major, so like I can make fun of it. But like I can't fix my toilet.
One more story on this. The head of the ironworkers of my dad's shop was an ironwork shop for a long time, was a Virginia guy from Roanoke named Walt Wise. And he talked about, as he was coming up in union leadership, he'd go to the high school, college, and career night, set up the ironworker apprenticeship table, colleges with nice brochures set up all around. The kids are all flocking to the college. And he's like, yeah, you can go there, but you know, you're going to end up, you're going to pay a lot and have a lot of debt, and you may or may not have a good job. Or you can come to me, and I'm going to pay you as an apprentice, and you're going to finish with a skill that will pay you very, very well, and no debt. But nobody would come to his table. Parents and guidance counselors. But the good news is,
do they go to the table now?
They do now. The people are getting it. They really are getting it. And I will say this is red states and blue states and superintendents in the most rural parts of states, but urban parts of the states too. They get that CTE is sort of not the alternate track, but probably everybody should have some CTE exposure to both have a marketable skill, but also it does tend to ignite your interest in other subjects.
Are you picking up that trend more broadly? Like, we can't have a conversation in Washington, D.C. without talking about AI, but I feel like it's making people think a little differently about what skills will be valuable. Like,
Yes.
we reported Axios about like what their parents want their kids to do,
Yeah.
and like HVAC technician, plumber, electrician are shooting up
Yeah.
in those kinds of polls. Is maybe AI helping to drive that change?
I haven't connected it, but I sure wouldn't be surprised. I mean, AI is going to destroy a lot of jobs. 10 years ago, you were telling people job security, become a computer coder. You don't need a college degree for that. A lot of computer coding jobs are going to be eliminated. So there's a lot of challenges with AI, and we did talk about that this morning at the hearing, how to use it effectively in education. What are some dangers of it? I find the hearing we had yesterday with Dr. Menars, I was looking at kind of a summation of that hearing that was an AI-generated summation. And I was at the hearing, and the AI-generated summation was quite inaccurate. And so, you know, now that can teach critical thinking. Just because AI produces an answer, okay, let's dig in and find out, like, is this answer valid or is it 80% valid? So anything that, you know, can inspire you to critically examine source material and stuff like that, that can have a positive education.
Can we stay on AI just for a second in the context
Yeah.
of education? Are you starting to pick up threads, or maybe even from the hearing today, about how it might change, how it might accelerate things? Or to your point, like, if it's just making stuff up, like teaching critical thinking is one way of taking a benefit from it.
I have a couple of different perspectives on this. We probably talk about AI. We don't talk about it that much in the Help Committee. That was a good thing about the hearing today. We talk about it a lot in the Armed Services Committee. I'm on Armed Services. We do a lot of work on AI in Armed Services, which we should. But I'm a little bit worried that the approach to it in Congress is sort of siloed. Like, I'm working on it in my committee. Probably the Commerce Committee is working on something, and I'm not that aware of it because I'm not on the committee. We need to be a little more holistic in what we do. The other thing, my wife just finished 8 years on the Virginia State Board of Education, and I think the state board is really grappling with, you know, how to make people, you know, kind of AI literate, able to use AI, able to have an appropriate skepticism about AI generated material, and then know how to go find whether it's true or not. So it's going to just really transform the way education is done. but we're still really
Still
early in it.
We'll bring you back next year for the Ronald Reagan AI Institute.
Okay, we got to avoid the silo problem if we can.
I want to come back to something you mentioned, like the success of getting the Pell Grant changes into reconciliation. What are some other wins lately?
Well, I'll tell you, I've been in the Senate for 13 years, and the Senate is a very quirky place in terms of like the rules. The House passes a lot of legislation if you're in the majority. Everything passes by majority. So the House tends to pass a lot of single-shot legislation. That's not the way the Senate works. The Senate passes few pieces of legislation with 1 million pieces connected to it. So you sort of have to learn. It's one thing, like my Jobs Act, which is what we called Pell Grants for Career and Tech. We had 65 sponsors like 7 years ago. But we could never get it passed because getting it out of committee is one thing, but you have to find which train is pulling out of the station. Can I make this the caboose? It's less getting the votes and it's more finding the vehicle. And it's been hard to find the vehicle on this one. So when the reconciliation bill, that's a fait accompli. The Republicans will do a reconciliation bill. I may not like it, but are there things I can get in the reconciliation bill? And so this was one. Worked with a lot of Republican colleagues. My chief sponsor for years was Rob Portman, then it was Mike Braun, then Todd Young has worked with me on this. We got it connected into the reconciliation bill. And the second thing was one that also is in the workforce and education space, critical, early childhood education. Katie Britt and I had a bill to take 3 tax credits that help childcare. So the childcare tax credit that helps families with childcare costs, the employer tax credit that helps employers that want to offer childcare to employees, and then ability to use flexible savings accounts if your employer has those for pre-tax childcare expenses. There are 3 existing tax credits. They were not particularly robust, hence they weren't used very much. And Katie and I had a bill to sort of supercharge them, and we got that added in to the reconciliation bill. Now, it had a problem, which is the original Brit Kaine was a refundable child tax credit, because if you don't make it refundable, then the lowest income families who really need it the most get cut out because they don't have a significant federal tax obligation. We were able to do it. It's not refundable. It's going to help a lot of people, but it will not help the people who need it the most. So that is work remaining to be done. But that's an example of, even in a bill that I didn't like and that Dems didn't like, trying to, that train's leaving the station, like, can I get something on that caboose? Those are 2 pretty good things in the workforce space.
Are there other top priorities that you've got like sitting around your back pocket with 65 co-sponsors just waiting for a train to leave?
Millions. So Rebecca Howard is over here. Rebecca is my chief education workforce talent advisor. We have a number of bills in the teacher training space, a bill called the PREP Act. We're really short on classroom teachers, and so we're trying to look at strategies to get more people into the field and keep them. And so that's one that is bipartisan. Everybody's grappling with that same issue. And there's some simple things you can do. There's innovative programs like teacher residency programs. Unfortunately, the Trump administration zeroed out all those grants earlier this year, which is unfortunate. But there are models that work. But also, here's a model that really works. Successful classroom aides who are really good with kids, but they're not licensed teachers. Maybe they didn't have the money to go to college or whatever. If you see somebody who's good with kids and successful in the classroom, the most important thing you can do is help them get a credential. You know they're good with kids, so help them afford and get the credential so that they can then be full classroom teachers. And that's called a Grow Your Own program, and a lot of jurisdictions are doing that, and there are things we can do at the federal level to help.
You went down a list of Republicans earlier. I imagine that's a group, you don't agree with a lot of them on much. But they're all with you on these education matters. Like, I started out as a Hill reporter in this town, and it was always fascinating to figure out what are the real bipartisan issues? What are the things that are going to be 98 to 2 or something? Education still one of those spots? Why is that? Like, tell me about those conversations with Republicans and how that brings people together.
Yeah, just yesterday, the House Ed and Workforce Committee passed the House version of a bill that Roger Marshall and I have. Marshall and I get along great. He and my mother both went to El Dorado, Kansas high school, decades apart. But there's a lot we don't agree on, but we are kind of playing lead in the Senate on ESOPs, employee stock ownership of companies, letting employees buy companies, and rules to make it easier for employees to buy companies. We got a really good bill passed that will make that a lot more attractive for owners to sell to their employees rather than to sell somebody else. So there's a lot. But on the education, look, there's a lot in education that's pretty darn partisan. You had Linda McMahon here. I worked really well with Linda McMahon as SBA administrator. I think very highly of her skills. I voted against her for Secretary of Education because I don't agree with dismantling the Department of Education, and I felt, well, I can't really vote for a person who is pledged to do something that I think fundamentally is the wrong strategy. But despite disagreements with her on that, she's been a real champion of this, the notion of Pell Grants for CTE. She's written articles about this for years. I have a high degree of confidence that at the federal level they will write the implementing regs and do a good job on this. So there are spaces within education.
Could you distill it down? Like, what are some other spaces that jump out of you where you feel like it's one of those things where if it went straight to the floor, it's 75 to 20?
So I'm set aside all the disagreements. What are more areas of agreement?
Yeah.
Career and technical education, youth mental health. Cotton and I had the bill to do grants to school systems that do no cell phone usage in school. We've not been able to get it passed, but when we introduced it, we got a lot of attention on the bill, and now many states have done it, even though we still haven't got it passed at the federal level. I would say things like that relate to youth mental health, there is a lot of common ground on. So CTE, youth mental health, I think teacher prep, if you go to the Virginia State Board of Education meeting this month and you go to the Utah one next month, they will be talking about teacher shortages. And so novel strategies to deal with teacher shortages, I think, is also something where we can agree. And that involves, these grow your own programs, but also working with the, education schools that are universities. Yeah. So those are three just in the workforce education space that I think, when I would also say childcare. So Katie Britt and Tim Kaine, what brings us together around childcare? It's a combination of what you hear from parents, what you hear from teachers, like, boy, a kid who's had high quality childcare comes to kindergarten really ready to go. But it's also what you hear from employers. So many people in this country are out of the workforce who want to be in the workforce because they can't afford childcare. So if you have high quality and affordable childcare options near you, talent gets freed up to come into the workforce in a way that employers really like. So you do have a lot of stakeholders around the table on bills like that.
The childcare one is interesting. It's somewhat related to the vocational one, where instead of thinking just so narrowly on a specific topic, Pell Grants, liberal arts degrees, education is just education. It's not what surrounds it.
Yeah.
And so I feel like when you think about childcare, it's like, what are the pieces that go together? Like, what's this holistic, like, if you take a step back, what are all the other pieces that you think fit into this to solve the problem?
Well, and we've touched on childcare, we've touched on CTE, we've touched on mental health, touched on teacher preparation and retention. So we are talking about a number of the solutions. You said the Republicans I mentioned, you probably don't agree on much. We agree on a lot more than most people think. We are in a climate where cooperation ain't sexy. That doesn't mean it doesn't happen. It just means that when we do stuff cooperatively, like the press isn't interested in it, if I call somebody a name, I can get a headline. So conflict is sexy. I remember my English teacher at Rockhurst High School once said, "What is the defining characteristic of a great novel?" And I'm like, I'm 13 years old. I don't know what the conflict. Conflict is the defining characteristic of a great novel. Well, I think our media culture sometimes exacerbates, but at least overemphasizes conflict, underemphasizes cooperation. All the folks that I've mentioned, I have had numerous bills with them, not just like one thing on education.
Well, we can have a whole other session on media as well, and as a member of the media, I'll come back for that one. But let's stick with something interesting, like disagreement on policy, how important the process is.
Yeah.
And so it sounds like none of these great ideas where there is agreement, it's not going to be standalone legislation.
Yeah.
And so do you spend most of your time on these kinds of trying to figure out, what can I get under the CR?
Yeah.
Maybe. What can I talk or sneak through something? Is that the only way we'll see any of these things pass?
This is the Senate that I have been in since 2013. So it might have been different before. But 2013, when I came into now, the fight is always about, half the fight, maybe 40% of the fight is finding enough supporters, and then 50 or 60 is finding the vehicle. And every once in a while the path will open and something will happen very fast. Mitch McConnell and I raised the age on all tobacco products nationally, including e-cigarettes, from 18 to 21, and it was a May to December from idea to law. That's not the norm. The finding the vehicle, and you're right, finding CR. Here's a workforce issue that's a quirky one, but is just a proof of this one that Susan Collins and I are working on. Immigrants can get a special kind of visa to come to the United States to work as religious workers for 5 years. So Catholic priest, rabbi, imam, and it's a 5-year visa. And you have to be sponsored by the faith institution that wants you to come. And traditionally what happens is, in the middle of that 5-year, if your parish says, man, what a good priest, we want to keep him, then they apply to change your immigration status to a longer-term legal permanent resident. And it used to be that 5 years was long enough to do that. Well, now the backlog is so significant, the 5 years expires, and you got to leave, and your parish or your synagogue is without you, and then you got to wait in your home country until you finally get a ruling on whether you can stay. Susan Collins and I have a very narrow proposal that would basically just say the DHS secretary can extend the 5-year period for somebody who has applied for the normalization and whose employer, whose church synagogue says, we really want to keep him or her. Pretty narrow. There's no way we're going to get this passed. As narrow as it is, just standing on its own. So we have to get it connected to an approach bill, to a broader workforce bill. Immigration bills aren't going anywhere these days, so it's not going to be an immigration bill that it's connected to. So yes, you spend a lot of time trying to analyze what is the train that could carry this car.
Sticking around the well of the Senate at midnight before the last bill goes and try and staple it to the last page, I guess. You mentioned Virginia a couple times, and you know, education is so often like a state issue. Mm-hmm. What can we learn from what's happening in Virginia, like your relationship with the governor, which changes every 4 years? What's good, what's bad?
Well, first, the Virginia story is a pretty amazing one because most assessments of quality of education put Virginia in the top 10. Some as high as 3rd or 4th, some as 7th or 8th. And we don't rest on that and feel good about that, but we do feel good about how far we've come. So when I was born in 1958, you couldn't go to school with a kid whose skin color was different. And Virginia, forget performance on any national test, Virginia was nearly the worst in the country in school attendance because we had jurisdictions that were closing down entire public school systems rather than integrate them. And so, and then at the higher ed level, women couldn't go to most of our universities like UVA. That was when I was born. So today, to be on a lot of top 10 lists, everything we're doing, we can do better. We've come a long way, and we've done it under Democratic and Republican governors. And
so
Democratic and Republican. I think the secret for Virginia was realizing how much we had hurt the state by not being focused on talent. The battles after Brown v. Board and maintaining segregation from 54 essentially to 71 or 72 eventually led to a rewrite of the state constitution. To, we were using state dollars to prop up private segregation academies rather than allow integration. And I think there was a collective sense of what have we done but hurt? What have we done but hurt ourselves? In my life, Virginia has gone from bottom quarter per capita income to top quarter. And the only other state that can say that is North Dakota. And they found oil. You know, we didn't discover anything except if you knock down the barriers between people and let folks be who they can be and then celebrate their accomplishments, whatever they look like, then you're going to both help people and then you're going to suddenly start attracting Amazon HQ2 or, you know, the institutions that want to be around talented people. That's what we discovered that enabled us to take the move, and it was bipartisan.
In more recent Virginia history, I mean, are there examples, specific programs that you're particularly proud of that when you hear from constituents like, that's a great idea, I want to go share that?
Yeah, I think every governor recently has got a couple of things that they can say. You know, for me, it was career and technical education and early childhood education. Those, you get a single 4-year term. You know, you can't succeed yourself. So usually it's one or two things. But I would say one thing that since 2010 to now, Virginia has done a lot better job of allocating state resources to schools to put a priority on schools in poor areas. So the Fairfaxes of the world sometimes get tired of the fact that they pay a lot of taxes, and usually it goes to Appalachia, but they actually don't care that much. They're, you know, the Fairfax legislators are like, that's the way it ought to be. Right. Appalachian schools, 20% of their budgets are local funds, 80% are state funds. In Fairfax, 80% are local funds, 20% are state funds. We weren't a state that focused on equalization, but the funding formulas, we could do better, but the funding formulas in Virginia.
Approach it as a rising tide that could lift all boats.
And that's
instead of just
been
consolidating.
Democrat and Republican.
One thing I love having these conversations in Washington, D.C. for is that you pick a topic and the people who show up are the ones who really care and are probably either in charge of writing the policy or think they're in charge of writing the policy. What's the homework you can give to them? What's the advice you would give them so they can be a force for good to tackle a lot of these programs?
Yeah. Well, so it's workforce and education, right?
Yeah.
That's the topic today. So then I'm gonna Rorschach it on a workforce point. We're gonna be in big trouble if we don't do immigration reform. We're gonna be in big trouble. Low birth rate, low unemployment rate, there's just no math out of that. And even if we change the birth rate like that, we wouldn't see in the workforce for 20 plus years. We have to do an immigration reform bill. And sadly, it's become a third rail topic. And when you say the word immigration, the Rorschach is security challenges at the border. We need to get people to hear immigration and think workforce. I do think if there is one little silver lining in here, and then this is the homework answer, is I think the low unemployment rate and the griping that I hear from my ag sector, my shipbuilding sector, my hospitals, my hospitality industry, workforce, it's going to be the tightness of the labor market that will probably convince us, I guess we got to do an immigration reform bill. And it won't be like the 2013 bill where we tried to solve all immigration from student visas to path to citizenship to everything at once. It will probably be a bill that will be very focused on workforce. But I think we need to do that. And the homework will be all of you. The reason we lost in 2013, I'd been in the Senate just 6 months and we did the comprehensive immigration reform bill, got 70 votes. I'm new. I think, wow, that means we're going to do this. The House will come up with something different. It won't be ours, but then we'll split the difference.
Oh yeah, you were new here.
Yeah, all I knew was the Virginia General Assembly. One side would do something, the other side you would split the difference, then you'd have a deal. I didn't contemplate that one house would just not take it up at all, not even in committee. We really missed an opportunity. But what I learned or relearned then is that a loud minority beats a tepid majority every time. We had the majority for that bill, not just in the Senate, but I'm talking labor, immigration rights activists, Chamber of Commerce, Farm Bureau. Everybody was, quote, on our side tepidly, but they weren't banging the door down to get it done. And the people who opposed it for a variety of reasons were banging the door down. So when we have a proposal that is a bipartisan one, I'm going to come to everybody I know and say, bang the door down. I'm not going to ask you to do that if it's a partisan proposal. It's not going to pass if it's a partisan proposal. It's going to really have to be a bipartisan one. That comes to some of
your co-sponsors on these bills. When they're 65, 70, you're a Democratic senator. We're at the Reagan Institute. I guess the advice is don't be a tepid majority.
Well, that is. And on, for ed and workforce, I mean, if we don't do immigration reform, that's my chief worry about the American economy. We have a million economic woes, tariffs, and we list them by the dozens. My chief worry is a productive, thriving, and sufficient workforce.
All right, that's a great note to end on. But before we get the hook here, Axios newsletters, if you read them, always end on one fun thing. I like to end on stage. One fun thing. Let's do one school thing. What was your favorite subject? What was your favorite teacher?
Oh my
what was the best party you went to in college?
So I actually write about this in my book, Walk, Ride, Paddle. That's not a plug. I'm just
available on Amazon. I'm sure.
Here, my favorite teacher story was my shop teacher in 7th grade, even though I was a horrible shop student. So I was working at my dad's metalworking, ironworking plant, but I had a carpentry teacher, and I was really bad at carpentry. This guy, Dallas Joe McKenzie, 7th grade teacher at Indian Creek Junior High. He was a young married with no kids. He loved camping, his wife didn't. So about every 2 months, he would just say in class, anybody want to go camping this weekend? 10 people would raise their hands. A couple of parents would volunteer to drive, and we would go camping somewhere. And my family was not an outdoor camping family. But after the first couple of these, I went back and said to my parents, hey, we got to buy a tent and do some camping. I left that public middle school to go to a Catholic high school, and everybody else was from Catholic elementary school, so I was really no friends when I started and kind of fish out of water. And about 2 weeks after I started, I got a call from Joe. Hey, Tim, Ron and Jeff, two of my buddies, we're going to go canoeing this weekend. You want to go? And it was sort of like he was wondering if I was getting along okay in the new place. Went canoeing. I was hooked from the first paddle stroke. I've turned into this huge outdoor person. I wrote a book about hiking the whole Appalachian Trail in Virginia, cycling the whole Blue Ridge Parkway and Skyline Drive in Virginia, and canoeing the whole James River in Virginia over the course of 30 months, called Walk, Ride, Paddle. And in it, I tell the story about, had it not been for Joe McKenzie, I'm not sure I ever would have done this. And then I realized, my wife read it and said, hey, have you ever gone back and found Joe McKenzie and told him how much he meant to you? I said, I really haven't. So I searched him. My parents still live in Kansas City. I found him. I reached out 2 Thanksgivings ago. We met and had coffee. I got a chance to tell him about how much he meant to me. When I did my book talk, when the book came out in Kansas City, I did a talk at the Kansas City Library. He came down and I was able to spotlight him to the crowd. But that's an interesting thing. It was not what the teacher did in class that really put this thumbprint on me that's turned me into a lifelong outdoors. It was more the example that he set, and then he showed interest in me.
But how a teacher can change your life.
Absolutely.
Senator, thank you so much for being here. Thanks to Reagan Institute for hosting us. I'm sure
Thank
we got
you,
more
guys.
great conversations.